Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. Today I'm going to be talking about the Destination e-bike rack from hollywoodracks. And this particular rack was purpose built for electric bikes. Now if you are in the market for a bike rack and are looking for something that's going to accommodate the heavier weights of e-bikes, this is definitely one to consider. Now full disclosure, I did reach out to hollywoodracks and they did send me this for review purposes, but as always, all thoughts, opinions, and conclusions are my own. So without further delay, let's jump into the details. Now first and foremost, this Destination e-bike rack will support 2 e-bikes, each weighing a maximum of 70 pounds. And as you can see here, I've got my Lectric XP 3.0 folding electric bike, which has got 20-inch by 3-inch fat tires. And just behind that, I have a much larger bike, the Puckipuppy Boxer, which has got a 26-inch by 4-inch fat tires. And as you can see, both of these bikes fit very well on this particular rack. Now in terms of tire sizes, this Destination E will support fat tires up to 4.5 inches wide, which is great news because the majority of fat tire e-bikes out there are usually between 3 and 4 inches. Now, one really important thing to take into consideration is the wheelbase of your bike. This Destination E will support a wheelbase up to 50 inches. So this 26-inch by 4-inch fat tire Puckipuppy Boxer that I've got back there does have a wheelbase just under 50 inches, and it supports it no problem. Where you're going to run into issues are with, longer cargo e-bikes that typically have wheelbases greater than 50 inches. And with those, you're going to want to look at some of the other rack offerings from hollywoodracks. Now, one of the things that I love about this bike rack is the fact that it supports both step-through and step-over e-bikes without the need to use any kind of, adapters or additional accessories to make it work. It basically comes with everything that you need here. And as you can see, we've got these frame grabbers. You've got one for the forward bike, and then, of course, you've got one for the rear bike. And what's nice about these frame grabbers is that they are locking, so you have that additional level of security so that nobody, runs off with your bike. The frame grabbers come in kind of 2 flavors here, which it includes both. This one here is, firmly mounted onto here. Of course, it slides back and forth, but you're not going to be able to just pull this off. Whereas the one in the rear, I'll get you a different angle here, is a quick release version. If you don't want to use the quick release, which isn't as secure, of course, you can use the locking version just like this. It actually comes with both, but for the purposes of this video, I do have the quick release one installed. So when I mentioned that this thing supports step-through e-bikes, you can actually use these frame grabbers to grab onto the seat post, and that's actually the recommended way to do it. Obviously, this is not a step-through e-bike here, but if you do use a step-through e-bike, you can just mount it to that seat post there. And then for your other bike, let's say a step-over bike, you can just grab onto the top tube or the seat post, whichever works best for you. So as you can see, securing the tops of the bikes to the rack is very straightforward. In terms of securing the wheels to the rack, you do have these ratcheting straps, which are really nice. And if you do have, particularly large tires, let's say closer to 4.5 inches and the wheelbase is a little bit different, you can get strap extensions from hollywoodracks. What I like about these is they also include kind of this rubber, protective sleeve on there so that you don't mess up your rims with these straps. And up front here, of course, we've got this anti-sway strap, which is important because the orientation of these bikes is going to be key. So as you can see, the rear bike, I've got the handlebars on the driver's side of the car, and then the front bike, I've got the handlebars facing the passenger side of the car. And it is because you have these anti-sway straps here so that you don't have, the front wheel moving on a pivot as you're driving. Another thing to mention about these straps is that you can adjust the position. So I don't know how well you can see it here, but there is another hole here. So you can actually unscrew this and pop it into a hole that's further out so that you can accommodate different size tires. Now you might be wondering why I have a folding electric bike on a rack, because doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? Shouldn't you be able to just throw that in the trunk of your car? Absolutely, but myself and my family, a lot of times during the summer and winter months here in Arizona, will go up north to escape the heat or take advantage of some of the snow, and usually that trunk is completely packed. I've got my daughter in the back seat, my wife up front, we've got the dog in there as well, and so space is limited, and so a rack like this really comes in handy because I can put both my folding bikes, non-folding bikes, at the rear of the car. Another reason why I chose this Destination e-bike rack is because I need to have tailgate access. And the beautiful thing about this particular rack is that it actually folds down flat very easy. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate that now. So the first thing you're going to need to do here is undo this clamp, and you can just spin this around. And once that clamp is undone, you can just drop it out of the way. And now you can come to the rear of the rack and carefully lower it down. And as you can see, the bikes are now completely flat and I have full access to the tailgate. And if I need to get anything here, there is plenty of room for me to maneuver here. This is well distance away, so I can, take out luggage, do whatever I need to do. And once you're done with all of that, you can carefully lift the bike rack back up in its upright position. Now, one thing I'm going to mention about this is that the pivot point for this is very strategically placed, which makes lifting this down and up very easy. Typically, one person can do it without an issue. Now, of course, when you're done, you're going to want to go ahead and lift this back into place and then tighten that down so it is nice and secure. As I mentioned earlier, this Destination E will support 2 bikes up to 70 pounds each. And if you're familiar with that Puckipuppy Boxer there, that particular bike weighs almost 80 pounds. So you might be wondering, hey, 80 pounds, come on, Tom, why do you have this bike on the rack that exceeds the weight limits? Well, I take the battery out. That battery weighs over 10 pounds. So as you can see, there is no battery in there, and it's actually recommended to remove batteries from e-bikes when you have them on these racks. The last thing you want to be doing is driving around with your battery exposed to the baking sun, especially in places like here in Arizona. So when I do remove those batteries, it weighs under the 70-pound limit. All right, so what I'm going to go ahead and do now is get these bikes off the rack and show you what that process looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do here is remove the straps. I just push the lever and these just ratchet on out of there. And then I will pull these out of the way. Do the same with the second one here. Move that out of the way. And of course, I'm going to do the same thing at the rear of the bike. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this safety strap here. Next, I'm going to insert the key into the frame hugger. We'll go ahead and unlock this. And then we will undo this so it releases the bike. And once the frame grabber is fully released from the bike, I can go ahead and remove this, as I've got the quick release one on here. And then I can pick up and lift the bike off the rack. And we're good to go. So as you can see, removing the bike from the rack is pretty straightforward. But if you have a heavier bike, it might not be as easy to lift off. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how the included ramp works. All right, so for larger bikes, you can actually use the included ramp. So we'll go ahead and align the notch and make sure everything is nice and level, which it is. And once you've got the straps and frame grabber removed from the bike, you can carefully lower it down the ramp. So as you can see, having a ramp is a very convenient feature, and the beautiful thing about this Destination E is that it's included. You don't have to buy it as a separate accessory. So now let's say you've gotten to your destination, you've removed your bikes from the rack, and now you want to fold this thing up. What does that process look like? Well, I'm going to show you right now. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that all of the straps are neatly stowed away. That way they don't get in your way when you're folding this thing up. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and remove these elastic straps and then pull down the lever. And you'll do the same thing on the other side. Next, you can lower the bar and re-secure it. Now to fold this thing up, you're going to want to go ahead and remove this safety pin. And then here on the other side, you'll just lift and pull out this pin. Then you can lift up the rack into its upright position and go ahead and reinsert the pin. And then be sure on the other side to re-engage the safety mechanism, and it's now in a locked position. As you can see, the rack is now in its folded and upright position, and as you can see, it gets pretty close to that rear tailgate, so nice and compact. All right, so while we've got this thing in a folded position, I do want to show you another feature of this rack. So this here is an anti-wobble mechanism. So this particular rack is compatible with 2-inch receivers, so they don't recommend using any kind of adapters or anything. It really needs to be a 2-inch hitch receiver. And once you get this thing inserted in, you can actually crank this down, and that will prevent this rack from wobbling within that receiver. So as you can see, I'm tugging on this thing. There's 0 wobble, and I can absolutely confirm that because I have loaded quite a few bikes on this, driven, 40, 50 miles each way to go do my mountain runs, and I can tell you right now there's no wobbling or movement in this rack at all whatsoever. Another thing to mention is it does come with a locking mechanism for your hitch pin. That way nobody can remove this thing and run off with it. And the beautiful thing here is it uses the same key to unlock that mechanism as it does for these frame grabbers. Now, when it comes to loading and unloading bikes on this rack, one thing that I'll point out here is you do have these guides, these centrally mounted guides. That way you reduce the chances of your wheel slipping off when you're rolling it up the ramp and the bike fall off. So really nice additional safety feature. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is get this larger bike mounted back on the rack. And of course, we're gonna be using this handy ramp for that. Now, given this is an electric bike, you might be, tempted to use like the walk assist mode to get it up here. I highly discourage that. You do not want to do that. Make sure the battery is out, bike is powered off. And then, of course, just keep an eye out on these pedals because they can bump up against this bar. But once it's in place, you can go ahead and use your frame grabber to secure it, and then you can go ahead and tie down the straps. All right, so now we've got the bikes fully loaded, strapped in, and properly secured. And once again, everything is nice and compact, as you can see. And most importantly, it is very sturdy. These things aren't going anywhere. Now, one other thing to call out is they do recommend when you've got, a couple bikes on the back of this rack to use the included red safety strap just to keep these things together. It also brings some visibility to the fact that you do have a rack because it is this bright red color. And if you're curious, the distance between the bikes when they're loaded onto here, it's actually 11 inches. All right, so as you can see, when these bikes are mounted on the rack, they do obscure the license plate. So I do recommend checking your local rules and regulations around license plate visibility. Good news is you can buy a little license plate holder that'll tack onto the back of the rack or the back of the bikes. That way, you don't get in trouble with the law. One other thing to mention is that depending on the size of bike that you mount to this rack, you could very well end up obscuring your brake lights, which could potentially pose a safety hazard. Good news is hollywoodracks does sell an optional light bar that ties into your brake system. That way when you hit the brakes actually light up. You can also get turn signals and things like that, but just another thing to keep in mind. All right, folks, so there you have it. That was my overview of the Destination e-bike rack from hollywoodracks. If you do want to pick one of these up, I will include a link as well as any available coupon codes in the description below. And if you use those to make your purchase, it absolutely helps support this channel and keeps the wheels moving on future reviews. But let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns about this bike rack. Happy to address those in the comments section below. And as always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.